The biting wind whipped at our faces, stinging our exposed skin as we navigated the treacherous, icy path leading to the mouth of the cave. Above, the towering, snow-capped peaks of Mount Rainier loomed, their majestic beauty a stark contrast to the creeping unease that settled in my gut. This was it. The Forbidden Ice Caves, a place whispered about in hushed tones by park rangers, a place locals warned us to avoid. But we, in our youthful arrogance, had dismissed their cautions as old wives' tales. We were 5 friends, bound by a shared thirst for adventure and a reckless disregard for our own safety. There was Liam, the self-proclaimed leader, a thrill-seeker, whose bravado often masked a surprising lack of common sense. Then there was Maya, the cautious one, her skepticism a constant counterpoint to Liam's impulsiveness. Ben, our resident tech whiz, carried a backpack overflowing with gadgets, his fingers constantly fiddling with his phone, even in this desolate landscape. Chloe, the artist, sketched furiously in her notebook, capturing the stark beauty of the glacial formations with charcoal and quick strokes. And me, David, an introvert who preferred anime and video games over wandering through the woods. My friends had forced me to come along after a recent breakup. The entrance to the cave yawned before us, a gaping maw in the ice, promising both wonder and peril. The air within was noticeably colder, a chilling gust pushing against us, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and indefinably unsettling. As we stepped inside, the entrance began to close, slowly at first, then accelerating like a closing fist, the sounds of grinding ice and snapping rock echoing around us as the tunnel became almost immediately dark. "Liam, what's going on?" Maya's voice was strained, tinged with a rising panic that mirrored my own growing fear. Liam, ever the optimist, or perhaps just in denial, chuckled nervously. "Just a little seismic activity. Nothing to worry about. Happens all the time in these old caves." His words lacked conviction, and the forced lightness in his tone only amplified the fear that gripped us all. The last sliver of daylight vanished, plunging us into an oppressive darkness. The only light came from our headlamps, their beams cutting feeble swathes through the echoing blackness of the cave. As we ventured deeper, the sheer scale of the cave system became apparent. Towering ice formations, sculpted by millennia of glacial melt and freeze, stretched towards us like the frozen fingers of some gigantic, slumbering creature. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, a faint metallic tang that sent a shiver down my spine. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional drip of water and the crunch of our boots on the ice. Our initial banter, the easy camaraderie that had marked our journey, had evaporated, replaced by a nervous silence, punctuated by nervous coughs and hushed whispers. We moved deeper into the cave, following a narrow tunnel, the ice walls closing in around us until the only light we could see was our headlights. We were completely lost in the darkness. We passed narrow passageways, intricate tunnels adorned with bizarre formations of ice, some of them glittering with a strange, almost ethereal luminescence. We moved carefully, checking each step, the fear of another collapse heavy in our minds. Chloe, usually so chatty, was silent, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Ben, the usually unflappable techie, was frantically checking his GPS, only to announce, defeated, that there was no signal. Then, Liam stumbled, his lamp flashing wildly before going dark, plunging us into deeper, more profound darkness than we had encountered before. The sounds of his fall were muffled, yet terrifying, with nothing but an agonizing silence followed. Panic flared in my chest, a hot, suffocating wave that threatened to drown me in fear. I called out Liam's name, my voice a shaky whisper swallowed by the oppressive silence of the caves. "Liam?" Maya's voice was barely audible. "Liam, answer me!" Only silence. The darkness pressed in on us, the cold seeping into our bones, freezing our thoughts as quickly as it chilled our bodies. We huddled together, the cold a stark reminder of our vulnerability in this unforgiving, subterranean world. Then came the whispers, faint at first, like the rustling of fabric on a cold, still night, building into almost inaudible sounds that seemed to come from the very ice that surrounded us. They were chilling to the very core of my being, whispering tales of something ancient, something malevolent. Legends of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit from Native American folklore. Stories of a cannibalistic creature that lurked in the deepest, darkest parts of the wilderness had been something we had discussed lightly around campfires, a thrilling topic to embellish our sense of adventure. Now, the chilling whispers were no longer legends, but a horrifying reality. The whispers spoke of hunger, of an ancient evil that had stirred from its icy slumber. Ben, his face pale, pointed to a section of the cave wall where the ice was slightly discolored. In the faint glow of Maya's headlamp, we could make out what appeared to be ancient cave paintings. Gruesome, grotesque images of a creature that resembled nothing human, with impossibly long limbs, sharp claws, and glowing red eyes. The creature from our campfire stories. We stumbled through the darkness, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, the metallic scent in the air becoming more potent with each step. It wasn't just the cold anymore. It was fear, a chilling dread that clung to us like the cold, damp air of the cave. The sounds of shifting ice and crumbling rock were all around us, the echoing whispers drawing closer, seemingly moving with us. The air grew heavier, as if the very darkness was pushing down on us. Then it appeared. A dark, shadowy figure moving quickly through the tunnels, its shape shifting and unnatural, its eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. The Wendigo. Terror, raw and primal, seized us. We scattered, the sounds of our desperate flight echoing through the cavernous tunnels, the creature's guttural growls and snarls chasing us through the darkness, its icy breath causing our lungs to freeze with dread. It was an almost immediate confrontation, a fight for survival in the darkness, with each of us fighting for our lives and desperately scrambling through the icy tunnels, our boots slipping on the cold, wet rocks, each breath a frigid gasp. The first to fall was Ben. One moment he was there, his boots crunching over the frost-rimed rocks just ahead of me, the beam of his headlamp swinging wildly across the ice-scoured walls. And the next, he vanished. It happened so fast I almost didn't process it. There was a gust of air, cold and sour, as if some ancient cellar had opened around us. Then a shape, a blur in the corner of my vision, and Alex's screams sliced through the cavern. It wasn't a human sound. It was something torn from the depths of the body, a raw, instinctive wail so primal it didn't even sound like him. The beam of his headlamp jerked upward and spun in dizzying circles across the walls before it went out. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, thick and obscene. Then 5. Came a noise I'll never forget. A wet, splintering crunch, like the snapping of a tree limb under too much weight. None of us moved. None of us could. We just stood there, our breath heaving out in ragged clouds that quickly dissolved into the dark, listening, waiting. I wanted to call his name, but the word wouldn't leave my throat. My tongue felt frozen, swollen behind clenched teeth. There was a rustling somewhere below, a sound almost like dragging, and then nothing. The darkness swallowed him whole. Someone, I think it was Maya, made a strangled noise, a half sob, half whimper. Her flashlight beam jittered over the glacial walls, trying to find something, anything. But there was only the ragged line of our footprints and the faint smear in the snow where Ben had been standing. No body, no blood, just absence. The cave seemed to close in around us then. The cold became something alive, something reaching under our skin, rooting itself in the marrow of our bones. And still, from somewhere deeper in the tunnels, we heard it breathing. Slow, patient. It exhaled across the ice, a low rasp that reverberated through the stone. When we ran, it wasn't because we thought we could escape. We ran because standing still would mean accepting what waited in the dark. Our frantic scramble over slick rocks and frozen pools felt like moving through a nightmare. The darkness devoured the light from our lamps, made every step feel like a blind leap into an unseen abyss. Behind us, the echoes of that first scream still clung to the walls, replaying over and over. Somewhere ahead, the passage split and narrowed. But I didn't dare look back. I knew that if I turned around, I'd see nothing. Or worse, I'd see everything. Because whatever had taken Ben wasn't finished with us yet. The earth shuddered. It wasn't a gradual shift, a subtle tremor, but a violent, earth-splitting roar that ripped through the silence. A sound that felt as if the very mountain itself was tearing apart. Ice rained down on us, a blizzard of frozen shards that stung our faces and obscured our already limited vision. A deafening crack split the air, followed by the horrifying groan of shifting ice, and the thunderous rumble of tons of rock and ice cascading into the chasm below. Arauda, the narrow tunnel we had been navigating, collapsed behind us, sealing our escape route. We were trapped. Completely, utterly trapped. The icy debris had blocked our path, and the sounds of falling ice and grinding rock continued, each echo a chilling reminder of our precarious situation. Maya screamed, a raw, primal cry that was instantly swallowed by the echoing cavern. Chloe whimpered, clutching her sketchbook to her chest, her face ashen. My own breath hitched in my throat, a cold knot of terror clenching my chest. The sudden darkness deepened, the meager light from our remaining headlamps swallowed by the newly formed barrier of ice and rock. Liam, miraculously unharmed despite the initial collapse, scrambled to his feet. "Everyone, stay calm," he shouted, his voice betraying a tremor of panic he tried desperately to conceal. "We need to find another way out." His words, however, were met with silence, broken only by the ominous sounds of the cave continuing its slow, agonizing collapse. The air grew colder, a biting chill that seemed to seep into our very bones, freezing our thoughts as quickly as it chilled our bodies. We were surrounded by the echoing groans of shifting ice, a symphony of destruction that seemed to mock our desperate situation. The initial shock gave way to a creeping panic. We were not just lost, we were trapped in a labyrinth of icy tunnels, the possibility of escape dwindling with every passing moment. The claustrophobic darkness pressed in on us, the cold air heavy with the metallic tang of blood, Liam's cut lip bleeding, and his nose beginning to rapidly swell. The sheer scale of our predicament was terrifying. We tried to find a way forward. Liam, with a newfound sense of desperation, began hacking at the ice with his ice axe, the metallic clang echoing unnervingly in the confined space. His efforts were futile. The ice was too thick, too solid, resistant to his blows. His actions only served to draw our attention to how intensely cold we were getting. The cold air nipping at our exposed skin, our breath quickly condensing into fog, the sounds of cracking ice ever present and just as terrifying. We were all shivering violently. Maya, ever practical, began to assess our situation. She checked Liam's wounds, finding that aside from his minor cut, he was thankfully all right. She tended to his lip, her hands trembling slightly as she cleaned the wound. We then took stock of our supplies. The meager rations we had brought, meant for a day trip, were clearly insufficient for whatever ordeal we had now found ourselves in. Our flashlights were 7, already dwindling, our headlamps' batteries strained and sputtering. I stood silent and withdrawn, clutching my backpack, my fingers still fiddling with my now useless phone. The signal was completely gone, a fact that added to the suffocating sense of isolation that was rapidly taking hold of our already strained mentality. Chloe, her usual artistic flair abandoned, huddled silently, her eyes wide with terror, her hands clutching the now torn pages of her sketchbook. Her drawings reflected the absolute horror that we were experiencing, and the darkness that had now become our cold, damp reality. Hours passed, each one an eternity. The initial panic slowly morphed into a numb, despairing acceptance of our fate. The cold was relentless, penetrating our layers of clothing, stealing the warmth from our bodies, and slowly creeping into our minds, affecting our thought processes. Liam's earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by a quiet desperation. He moved about the cramped space, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes scanning the ice walls, searching for any sign of a weakness or another exit. The whispers returned, softer now, yet somehow more menacing in their insidious persistence. They seemed to seep from the very ice itself, weaving chilling narratives of death and despair, mirroring the feelings that we were beginning to experience firsthand. They spoke of icy breaths, of death, of a long, slow, painful demise. They echoed the sounds of the cracking ice. The fear of hypothermia became a palpable presence, a cold hand tightening its grip on our hearts. Our bodies, already numb with the cold, began to betray us. Our movements slowed, and our minds were starting to grow heavy with exhaustion. We began to hallucinate, each of us seeing and hearing terrifying illusions, fueled by our hunger, thirst, and utter desperation. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the tunnel, a sound that sent a fresh wave of terror through our numb bodies. The Wendigo. It was back. We had almost forgotten about our initial encounter with the monstrous being, but it had not forgotten about us. The creature's presence, although unseen, was overwhelming. The air grew heavy, charged with a malevolent energy that seemed to cling to our very souls. We were alone, isolated, trapped, and utterly defenseless against the ancient, vengeful spirit that had now returned to claim our lives. The metallic scent of blood grew stronger again, as we were thrown into a fight for survival, for our very lives. The whispers ate, intensified, becoming guttural snarls, filling the darkness with promises of suffering. Our desperate fight for survival had begun again. The whispers started subtly, almost imperceptible against the backdrop of dripping water and the ceaseless groaning of the ice. At first, they were just sounds, a rustling, like the movement of unseen things in the narrow passageways. Then, they became voices, low and guttural, murmuring in an unknown tongue, a language older than time itself. They spoke of cold, of death, of a hunger that gnawed at the very soul. Liam, his face pale in the weak beam of his headlamp, swore he felt a breath on his neck, icy and chilling, even though there was no visible source. He spun around, his ice axe held high, but found nothing. Only the echoing silence of the cave, heavy with an unnatural stillness. Maya, her eyes wide with a growing unease, pointed to the wall. "Look," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Etched into the ice, barely visible beneath a layer of frost, were strange markings. They weren't geological formations. They were deliberate, intricate designs, ancient cave paintings. The paintings depicted a creature of nightmare, a monstrous humanoid figure with antlers that seemed to writhe and twist, its skin a patchwork of ice and shadows. Its eyes burned with an unholy light, and its mouth was a gaping maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. The image was visceral, primal, a terrifying visualization of pure malevolence. It was unmistakably the Wendigo. Its presence somehow felt even in its frozen depiction. Chloe, her sketchbook forgotten, stared at the painting with a mixture of horror and fascination. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers tracing the icy contours of the figure. The chilling detail was breathtaking, the artist's skill in capturing the horror palpable. Every line, every curve, radiated a palpable sense of dread. The creature's posture, its eyes, the stark contrast between its ice-like skin and the inky blackness of its shadow. It all added to the monstrous aura of the figure. The image was deeply disturbing, a disturbing depiction of a nightmare come to life. It possessed an unsettling realism, making it feel less like an ancient cave drawing and more like a snapshot of a very real, very terrifying being. The artist's skill transcended the limitations of the medium. It was as if the creature itself had somehow imprinted its essence onto the ice. Divyati. Ben, usually stoic and unflappable, shuddered, his face contorted in revulsion. He backed away from the painting, his eyes darting nervously around the tunnel. The unsettling silence pressed down on them, amplified by the ominous implications of the ancient art. He had always been a skeptic about the supernatural, but even he couldn't deny the unsettling feeling that pervaded the cavern. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping noticeably. A sense of dread intensified, its icy tendrils snaking around their hearts. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving chilling narratives of death and despair, mirroring the feelings that began to consume them. It was as if the cave itself was breathing, exhaling a frigid air heavy with the scent of death and ancient malevolence. We moved deeper into the icy labyrinth, our progress hampered by the narrow, twisting tunnels. The walls closed in around us, amplifying the oppressive darkness and intensifying our feelings of isolation and claustrophobia. Each step forward was accompanied by a sickening crunch under our boots, the ice groaning ominously with every shift in our weight. Every sound amplified the unsettling experience. The paintings continued, scattered throughout the tunnels, each one more disturbing than the last. Some depicted scenes of ritualistic sacrifice, others showed the Wendigo stalking its prey, its form shifting and morphing in a horrifying dance of death. The images were incredibly well preserved, defying the harsh conditions of the cave. The skill of the artist was evident in every detail, creating a visceral experience that etched itself into their memory. The imagery was deeply disturbing. It was more than just cave art. It felt like a visual manifestation of the Wendigo's malevolence, a tangible representation of its power. The paintings were not simply pictures. They were warnings, echoing the chilling whispers that seemed to seep from the very ice itself. Paranoia began to set in. Every shadow seemed to conceal the monstrous form of the Wendigo. Every drip of water sounded like approaching footsteps, every gust of wind a malevolent sigh. The line between reality and illusion blurred. We began to doubt one another, suspecting each other of playing tricks, of trying to drive them mad. The claustrophobic darkness, the oppressive cold, and the unsettling images in the tunnels began to erode our sanity. Liam, normally the calmest among them, started to become erratic. His eyes darted around, his grip tightening on his ice axe. His earlier bravado had been replaced by a raw, primal fear. The constant threat of hypothermia, the darkness, the whispers, and the unsettling cave paintings had started to take a toll on his mental state. He had never felt such deep and primal fear. Maya, despite her attempt to remain rational, found her resolve crumbling. She could no longer ignore the rising tide of terror that was slowly drowning them. The chilling images of the Wendigo haunted her thoughts, fueling the growing sense of helplessness that was slowly overwhelming her. She tried to remain strong, but the cold and the whispers were slowly chipping away at her willpower. Chloe, her face pale and drawn, huddled against the icy wall, her eyes filled with a haunted look. The artistic inspiration that had once fueled her had been replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. The disturbing paintings had awakened a primal terror within her, eroding her artistic confidence. She found herself unable to draw, unable to express the horror that was consuming her. The whispers intensified, growing louder and more menacing. They seemed to surround us, penetrating our minds, twisting our thoughts, and feeding off our fears. They spoke of impending doom, of the creature's hunger, of the cold embrace of death. The chilling narratives were no longer just sounds, but a chorus of voices from the deepest recesses of the ice cave, threatening to consume us completely. The cold was a tangible presence, a living entity that seemed to mock our efforts to stay warm. The isolation was crushing. We were cut off from the world, surrounded by the echoing silence of the cave, our only companions the whispering voices and the horrifying images that lined the walls. The weight of the situation bore down on us, crushing our spirits and diminishing any hope of escape. The fear was a palpable entity, suffocating us and feeding on our growing sense of despair. We were trapped in a terrifying nightmare, a nightmare where the line between reality and illusion had vanished, where ancient evils were awakened, and where the whispers of death promised a slow, agonizing end. Our survival depended on our ability to overcome our deepest fears, because the desperate fight for survival was far from over. The icy grip of the Wendigo tightened, and the whispers promised a terrible fate. The descent into darkness continued, and the cold, unrelenting horror tightened its grip. The air grew still, the whispers ceasing abruptly, replaced by an unnerving silence heavier than the oppressive weight of the ice itself. Then, we saw it. 11th. It wasn't a gradual reveal, a slow creep into view from the shadows. It was a sudden, visceral eruption of terror. One moment the tunnel was empty, the next it stood there, a horrifying embodiment of every nightmare we'd ever suppressed. The Wendigo. It was taller than any human, its skeletal frame impossibly elongated, its limbs too thin, too long, ending in clawed hands that seemed to writhe with unnatural energy. Antlers, massive and twisted, sprouted from its skull, like the branches of a dead tree clawing at the sky. Its skin was a patchwork of ice and shadow, shifting and flickering, constantly changing in the weak beam of our headlamps, making it seem both solid and ethereal at once. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent inner light, two burning coals reflecting the icy darkness of the cave. And its mouth, a gaping maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth, seemed to stretch impossibly wide, revealing a bottomless abyss of hunger. The creature didn't move with animalistic grace. It moved with a deliberate, horrifying slowness, as if savoring the anticipation of the kill. Its gait was unnatural, almost ritualistic, each step echoing with an unnatural crunch against the ice. The air around it crackled with an almost palpable energy, a tangible sense of malevolence that seeped into our very bones. The scent that accompanied its presence was even more horrifying. It was the smell of decay, of death, a chilling aroma that clung to the air like a shroud. It wasn't the smell of a rotting corpse, but something more ancient, something more profound. The smell of centuries of accumulated suffering and death. A smell that spoke of a hunger that transcended physical needs, a hunger for the very soul. Panic erupted. The carefully constructed composure we had managed to maintain until this point shattered. Liam screamed, the sound swallowed by the immensity of the cave, replaced by a primal, animalistic shriek. He swung his ice axe with wild abandon, the metal ringing uselessly against the creature's icy hide. The blow had no effect. The Wendigo barely flinched. The chase began. It wasn't a chase in the traditional sense. There was no fleeing, no strategic maneuvers. It was a desperate, frantic scramble, a chaotic retreat through the twisting labyrinth of the ice cave. The Wendigo's pursuit relentless, its movements eerily silent yet somehow omnipresent. We stumbled, fell, scrambled back to our feet, our breath ragged, our lungs burning. The darkness pressed in on us, amplifying the fear, the cold biting deeper into our already numb limbs. The echoes of our own panicked breaths, the scraping of our boots on the ice, the distant crunching steps of our pursuer, all combined to create a symphony of terror. Chloe, whose delicate hands had once coaxed beauty out of paint and charcoal, was hopelessly out of place here among the jagged ice and darkness. She tried to keep up, clutching the wall with frost-bitten fingers, slick with melted snow. But her boot slipped on a patch of black ice. Her body pitched sideways, landing with a dull, nauseating crack of bone against frozen stone. For a moment she only lay there, gasping, one gloved hand feebly reaching for the rest of us. "Help," she whispered, her voice thin and high, the single word shattering what little composure remained between us. But there was no time. From the shadows at the edge of our failing lamplight, it came. A shape that was little more than a silhouette of nightmare. Too tall, too thin, jointed all wrong. A pair of gleaming eyes stared out of a cavernous face, reflecting our light like cold embers. Chloe turned to see it just as it stepped over her. Her blue eyes went wide with animal panic. "No, please!" The rest of her plea dissolved in a scream so sharp it felt like a blade pressed into my ears. She tried to crawl backward, her palms scraping uselessly across the ice, but the creature's elongated hand clamped over her shoulder, pinning her in place with impossible strength. I'll never forget the way she looked in that moment. Her face contorted in a terror too raw to fully comprehend, her breath bursting out in frantic, ragged clouds. Then the Wendigo bent its skull-like head down toward her, and the darkness swallowed most of the details. All that was left was the sound. A wet, meaty crunch that reverberated through the cave, vibrating in my ribs, turning my legs to water. Chloe's scream broke off in a single choked gurgle. And then, nothing. Nothing but the creature's slow exhalation, like a beast savoring a meal, and the quiet, hopeless keening that rose from Maya beside me. I wanted to close my eyes to 13. Pretend I hadn't seen, hadn't heard, but the truth had already burned itself into me. Chloe was gone, and the Wendigo was still hungry. The sight of Chloe's death pushed us beyond the boundaries of fear. It was no longer a hunt. It was a fight for bare survival. Liam, his stoicism finally shattered, moved with a newfound ferocity, swinging his pickaxe with desperate abandon. Maya, her face pale and determined, used her knowledge of the cave to navigate the treacherous passages, guiding Liam and me toward what we hoped would be an escape. The Wendigo was relentless. It pursued us through narrow tunnels, its icy form weaving through the passages with unnerving ease. Its presence, its aura of cold malevolence, was an ever-present threat, its icy breath a cold kiss on the back of our necks, a constant reminder of our impending doom. The icy walls seemed to conspire against us, the tunnels twisting and turning, creating a dizzying maze of ice. The cold was intense. It wasn't just a physical discomfort. It was a living entity, slowly draining the heat from our bodies, freezing our limbs, stealing our strength, and eroding our resolve. Hypothermia was as much a threat as the Wendigo itself. We were driven by adrenaline, by a primal instinct to survive, the knowledge that we were being hunted by a creature from myth, a creature that existed on the fringes of reality, fueled our desperation. The chilling whispers from earlier returned, only now. They were closer, more insistent, speaking directly to our minds, feeding our terror, amplifying our fear. The cave itself seemed to be closing in on us. The walls were closing in, threatening to crush us, the darkness swallowing us whole. The ice groaned and shifted, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere that intensified our fear, each movement mirroring the rhythm of our pounding hearts. As we continued our frantic escape, the Wendigo's presence became a physical entity, an icy hand always upon our shoulders, pushing us forward into the chilling heart of the mountain. Its icy breath was a constant reminder of our mortality, a warning of our imminent death. The cold intensified with every step, turning every part of our bodies numb, slowing our progress, and chipping away at our strength. We finally reached a large cavern, a vast expanse of ice that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. We collapsed, exhausted, our bodies trembling from the cold and the exertion, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. We had escaped the 14th, immediate threat, but the relief was short-lived. We were still trapped, still hunted, still at the mercy of the Wendigo. The hunt was far from over. It had merely shifted into a new phase. The chilling darkness of the cave had swallowed us whole, and the monstrous whispers were a chilling symphony of despair, a precursor of the terrible fate that still awaited us. The descent into darkness was far from over. The chilling grip of the mountain and the Wendigo tightened its hold on our souls. The icy cavern offered a brief respite, a deceptive lull in the terrifying symphony of our ordeal. My mind raced, adrenaline giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. Liam, his face ashen, leaned against a jagged wall of ice, his breath misting in the frigid air. Maya, ever practical, was assessing our situation, her eyes scanning the cavern with a grim determination. Chloe was gone, another victim of the Wendigo's insatiable hunger. The sickening crunch of his bones still echoed in my ears, a haunting counterpoint to the drip, drip, drip of melting ice. Chloe, Alex. 2 lives extinguished in the icy heart of the mountain. Their deaths weren't simply tragic, they were a brutal indictment of our recklessness, a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of the wilderness, and the terrifying reality of our situation. We were trapped, hunted by a creature of myth, and facing the slow, agonizing death of hypothermia. The realization settled upon me like a shroud of ice, chilling me to the core. But despair wasn't an option. Survival was. A flicker of an idea, a spark of hope, ignited in the dark recesses of my mind. I remembered a discarded canister of pressurized propane in the abandoned miners' camp we'd passed earlier. A long shot, but a shot worth taking. My background in chemistry, a hobby once regarded as frivolous, now felt like a lifeline. If I could create a makeshift flamethrower. "Liam, Maya," I rasped, my voice hoarse from the cold and fear. "Help me. We need to find something. A fuel source." Liam, his eyes still wide with the horror of what we'd witnessed, nodded slowly, a flicker of renewed resolve in his gaze. Maya, without a word, began to meticulously search the cavern floor, her keen eye picking out details that escaped my own panic-stricken observation. We were a team again, bound not by friendship, but by the desperate need for survival. We moved through the cavern with a renewed purpose, our steps slow and measured, but our minds working in tandem. The hunt was over. Now it was time to become hunters. Padanenda. The propane canister was heavy, almost too heavy to carry, but the weight was a welcome anchor against the overwhelming sense of despair. We also discovered a length of copper tubing, discarded years ago, likely part of some forgotten exploration. My heart pounded with a mixture of hope and trepidation. This was our last chance. Finding a source of ignition proved to be the most challenging part. After searching through our dwindling supplies, Maya found a magnesium strip in her backpack, a tool initially intended for lighting campfires. Using a flint and steel striker found in the abandoned miners' camp, we managed to ignite the magnesium, producing a hot ember. The construction was painstaking, working in the limited light, our fingers numb and clumsy from the cold. We carefully attached the copper tubing to the propane canister valve, securing it with scavenged wire and duct tape, a makeshift contraption of desperation. The air hung thick with anticipation, fear interwoven with the faint, acrid scent of propane. This crude weapon, a flamethrower built from the detritus of an abandoned camp and hope, was our last stand. The Wendigo, its presence chillingly palpable, hadn't abandoned its pursuit. We could sense its approach, feel the drop in temperature, the chilling whisper of its icy breath on the back of our necks. The whispers, once faint murmurs from the periphery, intensified, echoing our mounting terror, the preludes to our demise. But this time, we weren't just prey, we were armed. The Wendigo emerged from the shadows, a horrifying silhouette against the faint ethereal glow of the cavern's ice. Its eyes burned with malevolent intensity, two infernal coals in the heart of the abyss. It moved with its signature slow, deliberate grace, its skeletal frame elongated and unnatural, its icy hide glistening under the weak light. But this time, fear was overshadowed by a desperate determination to fight back, to avenge our lost friends. With a deep breath, I ignited the magnesium strip, holding the burning ember to the propane canister valve. A hiss of escaping gas filled the air. Then, with a deafening roar, a jet of fire erupted from the copper tube, a fiery serpent unleashed in the heart of the icy cave. The Wendigo reacted with a guttural roar, its skeletal form momentarily silhouetted against the inferno. The flames licked at its icy hide, causing it to recoil with a shocking howl, a sound that sent a wave of icy terror through my veins. The creature, 16, seemingly invincible until now, was vulnerable. The flamethrower, a crude weapon forged from desperation, had proven effective. The terrifying supernatural beast recoiled, as though burned by holy fire. The creature was driven back, momentarily stunned by the sudden onslaught of fire. Seizing the opportunity, Liam and Maya attacked, swinging their axes with renewed vigor. The Wendigo, its movements less graceful under the assault of both the fire and the axes, staggered backward, its unearthly screams echoing through the cavern. We kept up the attack, our combined assaults forcing the creature into retreat, its eerie form a horrifying dance of icy death and fire. The flames of our makeshift flamethrower were a bulwark against its malevolent power. The cave itself felt warmer from the heat. We pursued it, our adrenaline a potent antidote to the numbing cold, our fear fueled by a righteous rage. The chase was arduous, the terrain treacherous, but we pressed on, our resolve hardening with every step. We drove the creature deeper and deeper into the cave's twisting labyrinth. The heat from the flamethrower illuminated our way as the ice melted slightly, creating a small torrent that aided our progress. The creature's shrieks continued to reverberate around us as the heat forced it to withdraw. Finally, we reached a narrow passage, too small for the Wendigo to follow, and collapsed, utterly spent. The raw terror of the experience etched into our minds and bodies. The sound of the escaping propane and hissing flames were our only sound apart from our ragged breaths. The ordeal wasn't over, but we had survived. We had faced the creature of myth, the Wendigo, and lived to tell the tale. The flamethrower, our crude, desperate invention, had been the key to our survival. The escape was fraught with peril. We had to navigate a maze of twisting tunnels, our bodies shivering with exhaustion, our minds haunted by the horrors we had witnessed. We were fortunate to have escaped the icy grip of Mount Rainier and the Wendigo, yet we carried the chilling memory of our lost companions. Our triumph was bittersweet. We made our way to the surface, emerging into the harsh daylight, the warmth a welcome comfort after the bone-chilling cold of the caves. 17th. Chapter 2. Skepticism and Loss. The blinding sunlight felt like a physical assault after the perpetual twilight of the caves. My eyes, accustomed to the dimness, watered, and I shielded them with a trembling hand. Liam and Maya were already several feet away, their figures silhouetted against the snow-covered landscape, their forms almost ethereal. We had emerged, blinking like newborn insects into a world that seemed both familiar and utterly alien. The fresh, crisp air filled my lungs, a stark contrast to the stale, icy breath of the Wendigo's lair. Yet, the relief was short-lived, a fragile illusion masking the deep wound of our ordeal. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. My clothes were torn and filthy, clinging to me like a second skin. The lingering scent of propane and the acrid tang of burnt ice filled my nostrils, a constant reminder of the battle we had waged. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the gnawing emptiness in my chest. The loss of Chloe and Ben, the vivid memory of their deaths, was a constant, suffocating weight. The silence, once a comforting respite, was now a deafening reminder of their absence. We stumbled towards the nearest trail, our movements sluggish and unsteady. The rescue teams, alerted by the emergency beacon Maya had managed to activate, were already there, their faces a mixture of relief and professional detachment. They rushed to our side, their questions rapid and impersonal, their concerns seemingly superficial, a mere formality. They examined our injuries, their attention focused on the physical, oblivious to the gaping wounds in our souls. I tried to explain, to paint a picture of the horror we had endured, but my words felt clumsy, inadequate against the overwhelming reality of the situation. I spoke of the Wendigo, of its unearthly presence, its icy breath, its bone-chilling screams, but my voice sounded hollow, a whisper against the roar of disbelief. The rescue team leader, a stocky man with tired eyes and a weathered face, listened patiently, but his skepticism was palpable. He noted the cuts and bruises, the frostbite on my hands, the exhaustion etched on our faces. He examined the makeshift flamethrower, a twisted mockery of a weapon, its charred remains a testament to our desperation. But he saw only a collection of strange, potentially self-inflicted injuries, artifacts of a dramatic survival story. He saw no evidence of a supernatural creature, only the signs of a near-fatal accident in a treacherous environment. The official investigation was swift and dismissive. They spoke of the harsh realities of mountaineering, of the dangers of exploring uncharted territory, of the unpredictable nature of the wild. They spoke of bear attacks, of accidental falls, of hypothermia. They meticulously documented our injuries, the charred remains of our flamethrower, but they saw no evidence of anything beyond a terrible accident, a tragic tale of human error in the unforgiving wilderness. The evidence, or lack thereof, pointed towards a more mundane explanation, confirming their suspicions. My recounting of the Wendigo felt like a desperate cry in the void, swallowed whole by the cold indifference of the world. The loss of my friends was made even more unbearable by the apathy of those meant to offer comfort, support, and justice. Their dismissal, their inability to grasp the reality of our ordeal, felt like a second betrayal, more painful than any physical wound. The official report, finalized within days, cited a bear attack as the cause of death for Chloe and Ben, and attributed our survival to sheer luck and timely rescue. The incident, deemed a tragic accident, was quickly closed, filed away with countless other tales of human folly and misfortune, lost in the annals of bureaucratic indifference. The evidence we presented seemed to disappear, absorbed into the indifferent machine of official investigation. My pleas were drowned out, my cries for justice silenced. The days that followed were a blur of examinations, interviews, and paperwork. The physical wounds healed, but the psychological scars remained, deep and festering. Sleep offered little escape. The icy cavern, the haunting image of the Wendigo, and the gruesome memories of my fallen friends replayed in my nightmares, their terrifying reality more vivid and inescapable than ever. The weight of disbelief, the burden of a truth that no one seemed willing to accept, pressed down on me, threatening to crush me beneath its weight. I tried to return to normalcy, to resume my life as if nothing had happened, but the quiet hum of routine was broken by the sudden chilling echoes of the Wendigo's screams, breaking through the quiet. The comforting familiarity of my surroundings felt fragile, hollow, constantly threatened by the return of the nightmare that had stolen two of my closest friends. The world around me, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed muted by grief, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of injustice. The vibrant colors seemed dulled, replaced by a dull gray that echoed my despair. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking horror. Every rustle of leaves sounded like the Wendigo's approach. The joy I once found in the mountains, the sense of wonder, and freedom was replaced by a paralyzing fear, a constant, gnawing dread. Even the warmth of the sun seemed to lack its former vigor, unable to melt the icy grip of trauma that held me captive. The silence of the woods once felt peaceful and serene. Now it echoed with the silence of loss. The skepticism of the authorities, the dismissal of my story, fueled a simmering rage within me. I carried the burden of their deaths, their memories, their silenced screams. I would not let them be forgotten. I would not allow their deaths to be dismissed as a mere accident. My need to make sense of the events fueled a new purpose, a burning need for justice that burned stronger than any physical pain. The mountain, once a place of adventure and exploration, became a chilling monument to our loss, a constant and haunting reminder of the nightmarish journey that had consumed us, altered us, and forever changed my life. The weight of that change threatened to pull me under, but it was a weight I would bear, fueled by a determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The journey was far from over. My personal quest for justice had only just begun. The official report felt like a cold slap in the face, a final brutal confirmation of my isolation. It wasn't just the skepticism, the dismissal of my story, the reduction of the horrific events to a simple bear attack, but the sheer lack of empathy that stung the most. Chloe and Ben, my friends, reduced to statistics, their lives abruptly ended and unceremoniously filed away in some dusty archive. The authorities had moved on, their job done, leaving me stranded in a sea of grief and disbelief. The world continued its relentless spin, oblivious to my pain. People offered condolences, polite platitudes masking a deep-seated discomfort with my story, a reluctance to engage with the unsettling implications of my narrative. Their sympathy felt hollow, a thin veneer covering the unspoken question hanging in the air. "Are you sure you're all right? Maybe you need a little help?" The unspoken help translated to a psychiatrist, a diagnosis of PTSD, a life defined by my trauma rather than my experience. The therapeutic sessions offered little comfort. The therapists, though well-meaning, seemed ill-equipped to handle the sheer scale of my trauma. They spoke of coping mechanisms, stress management, and cognitive behavioral therapy, but their clinical detachment felt like another insult, a further reinforcement of my isolation. My experiences felt too extreme, too fantastical, to be processed by conventional therapeutic approaches. Their attempts to help felt like a desperate, futile battle against an overwhelming force. Irabadavde. One night, the nightmares reached a new level of intensity. I was back in the cave, the Wendigo towering over me, its icy breath freezing my lungs, its eyes burning with malevolent glee. I screamed, a desperate, wordless cry torn from my very soul. I woke up with a jolt, my body shaking, my heart pounding like a drum. The lingering image of the Wendigo's face burned into my mind, more real and terrifying than any dream. The next day, I found myself staring at the mirror, my reflection a gaunt, haunted stranger. The vibrant energy that had once been so much a part of me, the spark that drove my passion for adventure, seemed extinguished, leaving only the ashes of trauma and despair. The mountain, once a source of freedom, now represented my confinement, a cruel reminder of the horrors I had survived, the injustices I had endured. The world outside my window still spun, oblivious to my pain, but the anger, the grief, the sense of injustice, these emotions became my allies, a flickering flame amidst the encroaching darkness. They were a testament to my resistance, my determination to uncover the truth, to find a way to heal, and to ensure that Chloe and Ben's deaths would not be in vain. The path forward remained uncertain, but fueled by my rage and haunted by their memories, I knew that I couldn't give up. The fight for justice, for recognition, for my own sanity had only just begun. My first step was to delve deeper into the world of Native American legends, focusing specifically on the Wendigo. I spent weeks immersed in dusty archives, poring over ancient texts and folklore, translating cryptic passages and deciphering faded illustrations. The stories weren't mere campfire tales. They were chilling accounts of a malevolent entity, a creature born from insatiable hunger and fueled by the darkest aspects of human nature. My research led me to the elders of the Nisqually tribe, the indigenous people whose ancestral lands encompassed Mount Rainier National Park. Approaching them with humility and respect, I explained my experience within the caves. Their initial hesitation slowly gave way to a cautious acknowledgement, a recognition of the shared history etched in the mountain's heart. They spoke of the Wendigo not as a myth, but as a terrifying reality, a malevolent spirit that emerged when the balance of nature was disrupted, when disrespect and greed ran rampant. The elders shared stories passed down through generations, stories that spoke of ancient pacts and forgotten ceremonies. They described the Wendigo's hunger as 21, insatiable, its thirst for human flesh and soul unending. They recounted tales of individuals driven mad by the creature's influence, consumed by an insatiable hunger that mirrored the Wendigo's own. They spoke of rituals performed to appease the spirit, ceremonies designed to maintain a delicate balance between the human and supernatural worlds. These weren't just stories, they were warnings, cautionary tales passed down to ensure the survival of their people. The elders also spoke of the significance of the petroglyphs I'd discovered within the caves. These weren't merely random scratches, they were ancient maps, a record of the Wendigo's movements, a chronicle of its encounters with human beings throughout the ages. They revealed a pattern, a recurring cycle of appeasement, violation, and retribution. The Wendigo, it seemed, was a guardian, a protector of the mountain's sanctity, emerging only when its balance was disturbed. The chilling tales, combined with the physical evidence, solidified my conviction that the authorities were actively suppressing the truth. Their dismissal of my account as a bear attack wasn't just incompetence, it was a conscious effort to maintain order, to protect the public from the unsettling reality of the supernatural. The cover-up served to reinforce the illusion of control, to prevent widespread panic, and to preserve the image of the pristine wilderness. The weight of my discovery settled heavily on my shoulders. The loss of my friends remained a gaping wound, but now my grief was fueled by a righteous anger, a burning desire to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The mountain held many more secrets, and I was determined to uncover them all, even if it meant facing the terrifying reality of a world far stranger and more dangerous than I could ever have imagined. The quest for justice had transformed into a sacred mission, to ensure that the truth behind the deaths of my friends and the existence of the Wendigo would finally see the light of day. The mountain had its secrets, and I would make it reveal them. The struggle had shifted from surviving the Wendigo to fighting for the truth against the forces that sought to conceal it. My personal tragedy had become a crusade. My days were a blur of research, construction, and preparation. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Each night, I relived the horror of the caves, but now, the fear was intertwined with a grim determination. I wasn't just preparing for another encounter with the Wendigo. I was preparing for war. I had to confront not only the creature but also the conspiracy surrounding its existence, the web of deceit spun by those who valued their reputation over the truth. The initial design was flawed. The makeshift flamethrower had been a desperate measure, effective only due to the element of surprise. To truly combat the Wendigo, I needed something more refined, something with greater range and firepower. I modified the fuel mixture, experimenting with different combinations until I achieved a far more potent, longer-lasting flame. The tank itself was reinforced, its design capable of withstanding the harsh conditions of the mountain. I even incorporated a rudimentary targeting system, utilizing salvaged parts from old surveying equipment. The result was a weapon far more sophisticated than the one I'd used before, a custom-built instrument of vengeance, a testament to my resolve. But weaponry alone wouldn't be enough. The Elder's words echoed in my mind. The Wendigo wasn't merely a physical creature. It was a spiritual entity, tied to the mountain itself, a reflection of the imbalance between humanity and nature. Their warnings about disrupting the sacred balance struck a chord, making me realize my previous actions hadn't been just reckless. They had been profoundly disrespectful. This wasn't about simply hunting and killing a monster. It was about confronting a powerful force tied intrinsically to the mountain and the human transgressions that fueled its wrath. My next step involved a journey back to the Nisqually Reservation, not as a researcher, but as a warrior seeking guidance. I presented my revised flamethrower design to the elders, seeking their blessing and wisdom. They didn't condone my quest for revenge, but they understood the depth of my sorrow and the intensity of my resolve. The elder woman, whose eyes held the wisdom of centuries, offered me something far more valuable than just tactical advice. She explained that the Wendigo was not solely fueled by human flesh. It also fed upon the negative emotions, the hate and anger that clouded human hearts. My desire for vengeance, while understandable, could inadvertently empower the creature, further fueling its destructive power. Her words were a chilling revelation. My burning rage, the very force driving me, could become a weapon against me. I had to find a balance, a way to exact justice without succumbing to the very darkness I sought to destroy. She revealed an ancient ritual, a ceremonial cleansing that could help me control my rage, transforming it into a focused energy, making it a tool instead of a liability. Days turned into weeks as I immersed myself in the ritual, the steps carefully detailed and imbued with centuries of tradition. It was a humbling experience, stripping away my anger's hardened shell, allowing a place for grief, loss, and ultimately acceptance. The cleansing ritual was not about extinguishing my desire for retribution. It was 23. About refining it, making it precise and focused, devoid of the uncontrolled fury that could empower the Wendigo. With the improved flamethrower and the newfound control over my emotions, I felt ready to confront the Wendigo. My previous expedition had been reckless. This would be strategic, calculated, and fueled by a burning resolve tempered by wisdom and restraint. The mountain awaited, a silent sentinel guarding its ancient secrets and its malevolent guardian. The air grew colder, a shiver that wasn't solely from the approaching winter, but from the anticipation of the inevitable confrontation. My journey back to the mountain was deliberate and methodical, each step carefully planned. I followed the ancient petroglyphs, deciphering their cryptic message, using them as a guide to the Wendigo's lair. I prepared for every eventuality, potential ambushes, treacherous terrain, and the creature itself. The journey was not just a physical ascent, it was a spiritual one as well, a testing ground for the balance I had sought to achieve. The approach to the cave entrance was quiet and eerie, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the icy crags. The entrance was larger now, seemingly ripped further open by the creature's previous wrath, a testament to its power and rage. I took a deep breath, the crisp mountain air filling my lungs, steeling my nerves. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was now overshadowed by a cold, calculating determination. This wasn't a blind charge into the abyss. This was a calculated confrontation. This was revenge. As I entered the cave, the icy air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread, an almost suffocating atmosphere of malice and raw power. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy, a sinister presence that sent shivers down my spine. The darkness within the cave was absolute, punctuated only by the faint glow of my headlamp. The deeper I ventured, the more the silence intensified, the only sound the rhythmic pounding of my heart against my ribs. Then, I heard it. A low growl, a sound that resonated deep within the earth, a guttural rumble that spoke of unimaginable hunger and rage. The ground trembled beneath my feet, a tremor that shook me to my core. The Wendigo was close. The air grew colder, the temperature plummeting to a level that seemed to freeze the very marrow in my bones. The game was on. And this time, I was ready. 24th. Chapter 3. Reckoning. The low growl reverberated through the ice, a primal tremor that shook me to my core. It wasn't just sound. It was a physical presence, a wave of malevolent energy that washed over me, chilling me to the bone despite the sub-zero temperatures. I held my breath, the metallic tang of fear coating my tongue. My hand instinctively tightened around the grip of my flamethrower, the smooth, cool metal, a reassuring presence against the growing dread. The darkness pulsed, shifting and swirling, as if the very air itself was alive, breathing with a malevolent rhythm. Then it appeared, the Wendigo. It wasn't the gaunt, skeletal creature of legend I encountered before, but something far more terrifying. It was immense, a hulking monstrosity of muscle and sinew, its skin a patchwork of matted fur and decaying flesh, its eyes burning with an unholy light that seemed to pierce the very darkness of the cave. Antlers, massive and gnarled, sprouted from its head, each point tipped with a wicked bone-like sharpness. Its claws, long and razor-sharp, dripped with an iridescent ichor, a viscous fluid that shimmered with an unnatural luminescence. The creature exuded an aura of pure, unadulterated evil, a palpable sense of malevolence that seemed to drain the very air of life. It moved with terrifying grace, a blend of brute force and unnatural agility, its massive frame surprisingly nimble in the confined space. It stalked me, a predator circling its prey, its movements silent but for the occasional scrape of claw on ice, a chilling counterpoint to the oppressive silence of the cave. The first attack was a blur of motion, a savage lunge that nearly caught me off guard. I reacted instinctively, rolling to the side, the flamethrower spitting a jet of fire that seared the creature's flank. The Wendigo roared, a sound that echoed through the caverns, a deafening cacophony of rage and pain. The flames licked at its flesh, causing it to recoil, but the effect was less dramatic than I'd hoped. The creature's regenerative abilities were clearly potent. I sprang to my feet, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The fight was on, a brutal, desperate struggle for survival. I moved with a deadly efficiency, my movements honed by countless hours of training and fueled by the raw fury of grief and revenge. I weaved and darted, using the terrain to my advantage, using the narrow passages and choke points I'd painstakingly prepared to restrict the creature's movement and gain a tactical edge. The fight was a chaotic ballet of fire and fury, a terrifying dance of death played out in the heart of the frozen earth. I used my flamethrower with deadly precision, aiming for vulnerable points, its eyes, its nostrils, the gaps in its decaying hide. Each blast sent the creature reeling back, its roars echoing through the caverns, but it always returned, its ferocity undiminished, its rage a terrifying force of nature. I wasn't just fighting a creature, I was fighting the embodiment of despair, the personification of the darkness that had claimed my friends. Each strike, each desperate maneuver, was fueled by my grief, by the burning desire for justice, by the relentless pursuit of retribution. The fight took me deep into the heart of the Wendigo's lair, a chamber even more claustrophobic and terrifying than the rest of the cave. The air grew thicker, heavy with the scent of decay and death, the walls dripping with a strange, viscous fluid. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, a chilling testament to the creature's power. The Wendigo was relentless, its attacks growing more savage, more desperate. It lunged, its claws tearing at my clothing, its breath hot and rancid on my face. I dodged, weaved, and retaliated with my flamethrower, each blast a desperate attempt to keep it at bay. I used my smoke bombs and flashbangs strategically, creating blinding clouds of smoke and disorienting flashes of light to gain a momentary advantage, buying myself precious seconds to regroup and re-strategize. As the fight wore on, I found myself drawing upon reserves of strength and resilience I didn't know I possessed. The pain was intense, the exhaustion crippling, but the fire of revenge burned bright within me, fueling my every move. One particularly brutal attack sent me sprawling, my flamethrower clattering across the icy floor. I scrambled to retrieve it, the Wendigo looming over me, its shadow falling like a shroud of death. Its claws slashed at my arm, tearing through my jacket and leaving a searing wound. With a roar of defiance, I managed to grab the flamethrower and turned it on the creature, holding the trigger down, unleashing a continuous jet of searing flame. This time, I held the flame to its exposed chest, ignoring the pain that shot through my wounded arm. The creature roared in agony, its screams a symphony of pain and fury that shook the icy walls of the cave. I held the flame, watching as the flesh around its chest began to char, watching as it finally stumbled back, its movements faltering, its aura of malevolence waning. Irupati aura. It collapsed in a heap, its once formidable frame now inert. Silence fell, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of melting ice and the ragged gasps of my own breathing. I had won. I lay there for a long time, exhaustion overwhelming me, the pain a dull throbbing in my arm and leg. But there was a different kind of pain too. The pain of loss, the pain of grief. The realization that nothing could bring back my friends, that their laughter and camaraderie would never grace the world again. I dragged myself to my feet, my legs shaky, my body trembling. I had avenged them, but it felt hollow, empty. The victory tasted of ash and ice, leaving a bitter aftertaste of grief and loss. I switched off the flamethrower, the silence of the cave pressing in on me, a stark reminder of the void left in my life, a void that no amount of revenge could ever fill. The mountain loomed above, silent and unforgiving, a witness to the brutal confrontation that had just transpired, to the victory that felt so very much like defeat. The reckoning was over, but the shadow of the Wendigo and my loss would remain. The mountain remained silent, but in my heart, the screams echoed on. Getting out of the cave was a Herculean effort. I had to navigate treacherous passages, ice falls, and narrow crevices, my body screaming in protest with each move. But the thought of their bodies remaining in that frozen hell spurred me on. I needed to bring them back, to give them a proper burial, a respect denied by the mountain itself. The journey out felt longer than ever, each step agonizing. The cold gnawed at my bones, the pain a constant companion. The memories of the battle, of the Wendigo's terrifying presence, played back in my mind's eye, replaying like a nightmare I couldn't escape. But each step closer to the outside brought a slight glimmer of hope, a hope of finally escaping the horror of the cave and the nightmare within me. Finally, I stumbled out into the brilliant sunlight, blinded momentarily by its intensity after the oppressive darkness of the cave. The world outside, though beautiful, was oddly muted, the colors dulled, the sounds distant, as if separated from me by an invisible veil. I knew I needed to create a memorial for my friends, a way to honor their memory, a tangible expression of my grief and my love for them. It wouldn't bring them back, but it would feel like acknowledging their existence. The idea seemed insurmountable, the task far greater than the physical strength I had left. But I knew that I had to attempt it. It was one small act of defiance against the void their absence had left. Yirubati yeru. The task was grueling, both physically and emotionally. The physical labor, to clear the snow to reach the area to build their memorial, was challenging. My battered body protested with every exertion, yet I did what was needed to be done. I faced many hurdles. The terrain was unforgiving, the weather unpredictable, the memories of the events in the cave haunting me with every breath I took. I gathered stones, each one carrying the weight of my memories, each one representing a piece of my lost friends. I painstakingly arranged them in a circle, creating a small cairn that overlooked the treacherous entrance to the ice caves, a silent tribute to the ones who hadn't made it out. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I carved their names into a weathered piece of wood that I'd salvaged from the wreckage of our gear. The wood softened by the incessant wind and the unforgiving sun and cold. The act of carving their names felt strangely cathartic, a way of keeping their spirits alive in my heart. I added a few wildflowers that, in some miraculous twist of fate, still dared to bloom in the harsh alpine environment, adding a delicate, ephemeral beauty to the simple stone memorial. The memorial stood as a testament to our reckless adventure, to their tragically short lives, and to the profound impact they'd had on mine. It stood as a reminder of the grief I would always carry. And the mountain stood silent, a granite sentinel over the icy graves below. The coming months were a slow, arduous journey through the landscape of grief. I sought professional help, speaking to a therapist who specialized in trauma. Talking about my experience felt both necessary and excruciating. Each session was a slow, painful excavation of the memories, the emotions, the guilt, the overwhelming sense of loss. The therapist helped me navigate the complex maze of my emotions, guiding me through the fog of grief and helping me to acknowledge the enormity of what had happened. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to heal. The raw edges of my grief began to soften, the memories, while still painful, losing some of their sharp sting. I learned to accept the reality of their absence, the gaping hole their deaths had left in my life. The process was agonizingly slow. Some days, the pain felt as raw and fresh as it did on that horrific day within the cave. Other days, a strange sense of peace settled over me, a peaceful acceptance. I realized that my friends were not simply victims of the Wendigo or a bear, as the authorities claimed. They were victims of circumstance, and my own recklessness. They were courageous adventurers, kind friends, and the memory of their laughter and their presence would forever remain carved on my heart. The experience changed me irrevocably, leaving scars both visible and invisible. But it also strengthened me, revealing reserves of resilience and determination I never knew I possessed. The memory of their kindness, their courage, and their friendship is now a part of me. The mountain remained a constant reminder of my loss and my victory. I would never forget my friends. But over time, I learned to live with my grief, my heart forever carrying the weight of their absence, but also the enduring warmth of their memories. And though the shadow of the Wendigo still lingered in the recesses of my mind, it no longer held the power to consume me. The reckoning was over. Or was it? A subtle unease remained. The silence of the mountain seemed to harbor a new, unspoken threat. The memory of the Wendigo still burned within me. The mountains kept their secrets, and the mountains had more to show.